I welcome all of you on platform of Urbanisation Education. Sorry, I can't remove this mask because this facility, recording facility is being shared by other mentors also. To keep myself safe and others also, I need to use this. So please bear with me. See, today I'm going to have interaction. I have already had interaction. I'm going to publish that interaction with the Professor Ashok Bardhan. He's a really erudite personality, very learned personality. And I had a marathon interaction session with Professor Ashok Bardhan. This entire series is my interaction with the visionaries, the entire crux of their life we get to know. And through this interaction, today's interaction, we learn about the journey of Professor Ashok from Jawaharlal Nehru University to America. During the interaction, he told that he's the person who has got educated from first world, second world, and third world. He got educated from Russia, from India, from America. And he's a truly diversified profile, economy to machine learning, talks about economy, talks about agriculture domain in India. So he's been scientist, economist, consultant, and senior economist in the prestigious University of California, Berkeley. And this is the university I want to tell you. It's a public university, not private, unlike Harvard and all. Public university in which every department of the university, you know, there are so many departments in university. Every department of university is among the top 10 of the globally universities. I mean, top 10 among any such department everywhere anywhere in the world. So let's say you talk about School of Mechanical Engineering, that will be among top 10 of all such schools in all the universities of the world. That is something which is very, very prestigious. We talk about his journey from Jawaharlal Nehru University to California, Berkeley. And he talks about artificial intelligence, machine learning, econometrics, how it can be used in decision making. You know, he talks about that country, India cannot be developed country unless until agriculture is developed. So it starts from there, how it can be made. I got opportunity to discuss certain points with Professor Ashok Bardhan. My main points of interaction were about his diversified profile in the beginning, how he could get to there, how he from science to shifted over to economics and then is working in that domain now. Data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, the buzzwords which we know today, talks at length about that. He talks about the outsourcing jobs to India from developed countries. He talks about some peculiar features of University of California, Berkeley. India as a knowledge economy, how it is possible, when it can be there. Job market in India, talks about certain economic sectors of India. As I told you, agriculture sector, till it is not developed, India cannot be developed economy. So I got the opportunity to interact with him. Again, I will request you that these kind of interactions you should listen once you are totally calm and you are having sufficient time, spare time and listen to these visionaries. Certainly we get enriched through their experience. So let's go and listen to Professor Ashok Bardhan.
Okay, good morning, Professor Ashok, and welcome, and thanks a lot for giving your precious time to me today here.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks a lot, sir, once again. And I want, sir, you to briefly tell us about your journey so far. Before, because I have prepared a couple of questionnaire, sir, and I'll be interacting with you as per the questionnaire. But before that, I request you to briefly introduce yourself to us.
Okay, so let me start with my academic journey. My first degree is in physics and mathematics, and it was from Moscow, Russia. Then I have an MPhil in international relations from JNU in India, in Delhi. And then I did a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. I have worked in the Reserve Bank of India for some years before I came to the US to do my PhD in economics. Then I joined in the Haas School of Business, UC Berkeley, that you can see behind me, as a senior economist. My job was mostly research, academic research on various topics from housing and real estate to technology and trade, the economy, regional economics and urban economics, a whole range of topics. I left about 6-7 years ago and became an independent consultant and economist and data scientist. As you all know, there is this whole data science revolution going on, big data, data analytics, etc. And economists, of course, have always dealt with data. So this is actually a very natural kind of an extension of what we do. Statistics is very much a part and parcel of the toolkit of every economist. And now with the addition of machine learning technologies and all, this has become kind of a very natural path forward of applying many of the insights of economics and econometrics, combine them with artificial intelligence and machine learning in order to generate a whole range of actionable insights for businesses and for companies, for governments, for organizations, for individuals, etc. So that in a nutshell is my journey, or as a friend of mine used to say, that Ashok, you seem to have a graduate degree each from the first world, the second world, and the third world. So that's the story.
Professor Ashok, indeed it is very interesting, sir. I tend to normally deviate from my questionnaire, listening to what you have just information given us. I want to ask you, sir, why this transition from science to economics? That is number one. And my second question to you is, like, from economics to those domains like machine learning, data science, which actually are thought of domains reserved for computer science students or something like that. How you could overcome that, and is age any criteria for learning, or you have acquired these skills little later in your age? So these two questions from my side, sir.
Okay. Let me take up the first one initially. You know, people don't really know at the age of 17 what they want to be, very often.
Yes.
Some of you are lucky enough to know, even in high school or maybe even in middle school, that you want to be a physicist or an architect or whatever. When I was in high school, I thought I loved physics and I wanted to do that. So I started, down the path of getting a degree in physics. By the third year itself, I knew this was really not my thing. And, in most countries, the education system is somewhat inflexible. You cannot suddenly change course midway. And that was my problem. I had to finish the whole physics degree. And I knew even at that time that I wanted to study something in the social sciences. A lot of you folks may not agree, but let me assure you that actually social sciences are much more difficult than the sciences in many ways. There are lots of, individual agents, groups, societies, their behavioral aspects interact with each other in ways that do not conform to some really kind of, hard and fast mathematical rules. It's much more difficult in many ways. Anyway, so that's why I knew I wanted to to complete a degree in economics, and that's how I ended up on the economic side. Regarding your second question, first of all, and I would like to stress this for the benefit of viewers, there's really no age at which you cannot learn. You must have heard of the old myth that, oh, it's very difficult to learn a new language unless you're a child or you're really very young and all that.
Yes.
I can assure you, as someone who has learned a number of other languages later on in life, that's not really accurate. You can. Coming to your specific question about economics and machine learning and all. Remember, I said that statistics is one of the key components of the toolkit of an economist. Machine learning, to a very, very large extent, is actually built up on the whole edifice, on the pillar, the structure of statistics. It's not that different. Many of the machine learning algorithms actually are, very often very, very similar to what you have in statistics and what we call econometrics, which is effectively the application of statistics to economic problems and data. Plus, you have to remember that, in fact, when this whole big data revolution started, a lot of the economists were really kind of a bit bemused by this whole phenomenon, because they said, hold on, we have been dealing with and analyzing data for decades and never thought of it as some kind of a data revolution. I'm, of course, saying this somewhat lightly, because what has happened, the reason why you have this kind of a whole phenomenon going, is that there's been a confluence of a number of factors. Computing power has greatly increased. Internet has come about. A lot of data is available online. There's a lot of real-time data that comes in. And a number of advances have been made on the theoretical side, including insights from artificial intelligence and on the whole machine learning and statistics side that kind of can effectively exploit and leverage the availability of all this data and the computing power. So that, in a nutshell, is the scenario that exists in the whole world today.
Professor Ashok, you said that you were lucky enough to have your degrees from all the three worlds, first, second, and third world. So I want to request you to tell us something. I mean, the kind of education system in these three countries, very briefly. You had it in Russia and then Jawaharlal Nehru University and Berkeley. So what difference did you find, sir?
That's a good question and not an easy one to answer. Each country's education system had its, at least to the extent that I was exposed to them. After all, I'm not sure I can generalize across the entire education system. I was in one specific university in each place. But the negative aspect of the education system in the Soviet Union, which was the name of the country when I was there, was that it was inflexible. They had a 5-year course plus 1 year for learning Russian language. So 6 years, and whatever kind of specialization you chose, you had to stick through it till you got a graduate degree, a master's. There was no kind of degree after 3 years or 4 years that you could kind of then, move on to other things. So you were in it for the duration. On the other hand, the quality of professors and teachers and many of kind of the intrinsic benefits of a system that could concentrate resources on higher education to a degree that that country could, resulted in huge benefits for the students. I mean, the quality of our teachers and professors was phenomenal. coming to JNU, one of the great things about not just JNU, but I think to a large extent about the Indian education system is that, see, we are a large country. We have large numbers of students, large congregations of students in places. Ultimately, what's a university? You bring a whole lot of bright young people together, and there's this whole cross-fertilization of ideas among themselves, interaction with the faculty, with professors, talking, exchanging ideas, etc. That was unparalleled in JNU. In Berkeley, where I've been the longest, it's a somewhat similar situation. You have a large number of extremely thoughtful, folks who are constantly kind of interacting with each other and exchanging ideas. The professors are very good. The university has the reputation of being one of the best in the world in practically every discipline. So of course, that's one of the key defining features of this university. I think in many ways, I've been lucky to have gone to 3 universities in these 3 places, because in some ways they had many common features. One on which it was, of course, the coming together of people from very wide range of backgrounds and even countries. In Moscow, for example, I had people studying with me from about 110 countries, if I recall correctly, many of whom I'm still in touch with. So there are pluses and minuses everywhere. I think the minus on the Indian side would be that our higher education sector needs to be funded far more than it is. One of the negatives in more or less every country is that it's not entirely clear how responsive is the higher education system to the needs of the economy and the job market. Are they producing people in large enough numbers and appropriately equipped to be, productive members of society and get appropriate jobs and help grow the economy and the country at large? I'm not suggesting that the sole role of a university is to create people who are going to find jobs. No, a university is much more than that. Education has a value by itself, not just in relation to whatever job that's going to be there at the end of the degree or whatever. Which is why I'm not saying that, let's say tomorrow, India needs a whole lot of, let's say mechanical engineers. So the higher education sector should concentrate on producing mechanical engineers. And what about people who want to study, say, Hindi or Sanskrit or English language PhDs? Does that mean that, or many of the social sciences where there's not an immediately kind of perceptible link to the job market? No, all of these are necessary, which is why, by the way, the US education system, which they realized early on, liberal arts education, as they call it, has played such a big role in the development both of the higher education system here and for creating many of the positive attributes of US society.
Great. Professor Ashok, I understand you must have spent many years in Berkeley in that university. dream destination for many youngsters, many students across the world. I want to ask you, sir, what is something very peculiar about this university? What you want to tell us very special thing about this university?
Well, one immediate special kind of unique feature of the University of California, Berkeley is that it's unlike many of the other famous universities that most people have heard of, say Harvard or MIT or Yale, etc. This is a public sector university. It's known as a public university.
Okay.
Those are private universities, private in a somewhat limited sense of the word. They're not for profit, but they're private universities. This is a public university, to some extent funded by the state of California, although less so with each passing year. But it still has a mandate for teaching, school graduates of the public school system of the state of California. This is one unique feature. The other is that Berkeley is probably the only university in which nearly every department is in the top 10 departments in the world.
Okay.
From
Great.
economics, which is probably joined first now, to sociology, to history, to engineering, to computer science, across the board. Nearly every department is extremely, good.
Okay.
What else? Well, it's located very close to Silicon Valley. So it's at the heart of this whole innovative ecosystem that has been created in California.
Yes.
It's also unique because of its history. Perhaps many of the viewers may not know this, but it had a big role to play in the 1960s free speech movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement.
Okay.
It has been at the forefront of many of the progressive social and cultural phenomena in the US. So there are many things that set Berkeley apart.
Okay. Professor Ashok, you just mentioned one very peculiar thing about this university, that it is public university. Yes. Many in India are not aware, because as you know, in India, majority of the good universities, you talk about IIScs, you talk about IITs, you talk about Jawaharlal Nehru universities, Delhi University, they are in the public domain only, not in private domain. But we see the contrast picture in US also, when very good universities in the private sector also and public sector also. I want to ask you, sir, very straight question. Is there any advantage getting educated from public universities like Berkeley, as far as the scholarship is concerned or fee structure is concerned, especially for students of India?
As far as Indian students are concerned, they would be considered foreign non-resident students. So their tuition, remember, there's tuition mostly only at the undergraduate level. Graduate students who come for, especially for PhD, would get aid in some form or the other. But for undergraduates who are coming for a bachelor's degree, there is the tuition actually is very high. It doesn't matter whether you're going to a public or a private university. There's not that big a difference.
Right, sir. Professor Ashok, before I go to my regular questionnaire, I want to ask you one last question, sir, related to this university system only, education system. When student wants to come to countries like US and abroad countries for masters after their graduation, because fee structure is huge, so it is not possible for all the students to afford that. So do you recommend that students should come for PhD courses instead of master's courses? Because in PhD, normally you get the scholarship and the fee structure is less. So what is your take on that, sir?
That depends on many things. First of all, there are many departments that I think take people first for masters and some of the departments give aid for that as well.
Okay.
I think many of the engineering ones do.
Okay.
There are some departments, for example, like economics, that do not take students for masters. They take them directly for PhD, and there is involved.
Okay. Hmm.
So it depends. I don't think there is some general rule out there.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good. Now I come to my first question, sir, and that is related to outsourcing of the jobs. You know, there are so many entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs in India who are looking forward to such opportunities which are there in outsourcing of the jobs from developed countries like US and Europe to countries like India. Can you please suggest us what should be the modus operandi or what should be the approach followed by such entrepreneurs who are looking for such opportunities?
Well, let's step back a moment. We know why a lot of this offshoring takes place from more developed countries to, developing countries. It's due to a number of reasons. One is the fact that, of course, there's a significant wage salary differential. Secondly, the fact that countries like India and all have a very sizable number of extremely good engineering and other talent. Third is the fact that, and this is a unique Indian advantage, is that many of our specific attributes of both our economy and society, the fact that we have English language, which is, widespread, the fact that many of our business organizations, institutions are similar to those, say, in most of the, at least the English-speaking Western countries. All of this creates an environment where there's the possibility, particularly, of course, in the service sectors, to, leverage this whole offshoring phenomenon. But a lot of the low-hanging fruit has gone, as you well know. I first started working on this phenomenon nearly 20 years ago.
Okay.
And my colleagues and I had some of the early papers on what are the determinants, what causes this whole phenomenon, what could be some of the implications, both on the economy that is shedding these jobs, so to speak, and the economies that are receiving them. Now, we have gone beyond that stage. Now we are at a stage, let me give you a slightly a China analogy. In the initial years, when the manufacturing offshoring phenomenon was gathering steam in the 80s and the early 90s and all, from the US to China and from many other countries to China, it was primarily driven by what you might call the push phenomenon. The fact that it was the Western multinational companies that sought out most of the deals. They were the ones who kind of explored, okay, can we, set up this plant here? Can we do this there? Can we manufacture this component there, etc. By the late 90s or so, China already had enough of a manufacturing base and a skill base and a organizational and financial base that they could take the initiative, in the sense that they could come up with ways to analyze the structure of various industrial companies in, say, the US or Japan or other countries, and figure out that, okay, out of these, components or these parts or these products, we can actually figure out a way to make them cheaper or more efficiently or even both, back in China. And then they took the initiative. I think we are we have been at that stage also for a while. And there's a lot of scope now in, for example, leveraging this whole phenomenon of, AI, machine learning, big data, data analytics related, processes and jobs that can be kind of targeted. India has many advantages in this sphere, and they actually carry over from the previous advantages. We have a very large number of people who can very quickly ramp up on the data analytics side. The combination of engineering and statistics and math and all the cluster that determines how good a person can be in data analytics, we have that. So I think many of the entrepreneurs can be proactive and figure out where are the biggest opportunities going forward in these areas, and then target those Western companies who actually, for your information, feel a pinch here. There's a realization that there's a significant shortage of data science and data engineering related occupations. People who are experts in these fields in the US. If I remember correctly, there's a shortage, a report came out recently of about 500,000 people. That's a sizable number. And if that's the case, of course, the Indian companies can market in a very targeted manner some of the specific areas where data engineering and data science is going to be effective in the coming decades.
Professor Ashok, I would like to ask you one related questions here. Whenever there's change in government, policies also do change. And we have seen in US change of the government. So can we expect more outsourcings to country like India?
I think it never stopped even during the previous government. So a lot of it was more talk than action. There was some impact, and particularly with some of the H-1B visa related things and some other specific kind of barriers that were erected. But I think under the present government, of course, I think there won't be any obstacles. Yeah.
Great. My next question, Professor Ashok, is related to multinational companies of these countries like US, Europe. How do you think they select the vendors in India or countries like India for doing the offshore jobs?
So again, as I said, some of the criteria are, so there are, of course, the economics of this whole thing has to work out for them. That's one. The skill set is very important, because it's not just the fact that, cheaper doesn't necessarily mean that, it's better.
Yeah.
So the productivity level has to be taken into account to adjust for that.
Yes.
So the combination of both, they are very particular about reliability, about being able to deliver as per schedule, about increasingly about data security and privacy of a whole lot of, individual data records that they're going to be working with. And many of the other standard, due diligence matters that companies look for. Very often, like in most, business matters, the way they go about looking for people is somebody they know. Here is one interesting factor. People probably don't know about this. one reason why the entire offshoring wave from Silicon Valley to places like Bangalore or Gurgaon or Pune or Bombay, wherever, Hyderabad, lots of places took place, was that by that time, by let's say the mid to late 90s, a very sizable number of people of Indian origin were working in the tech sector in Silicon Valley, not too far behind me here. And of course, they knew people back in India. They had connections, all of them, literally all of them, in fact, at that time, were first generation immigrants to the US. So, you know, the company CEO would say, well, you know, what do you know about Bangalore? Or what do you know about Pune, about the prospects of, you know, offshoring there? Do you know someone? Do you know someone? And many of these linkages of people who are here in multinational companies back with their home countries has been extremely important in setting up, you know, in doing the due diligence. After all, how do we really kind of, you know, operate in many aspects of our life? You know somebody who knows somebody who vouches for someone, and then you take it from there. Then you do your own due diligence also. It's very similar.
Similar to that. Okay, great. Professor Ashok, I will come to now manufacturing jobs or manufacturing sector in India. In the ongoing pandemic situation, what do you think the steps needs to be taken by private or public sector in India to attract the manufacturing jobs?
This is a very good and a very important question. Let me start off with a small story. About 13 years ago, in connection with a project that I was doing on the globalization of the tech sector, you know, the fact that many of the multinationals were setting up research and development centers in Bangalore and Beijing and all of that, had already set them up, in fact, even by 2007, which is when I was doing this project. So we were studying that, and in connection with that, I was in Beijing interviewing the chief research and development scientist, the officer of a joint venture between a Swedish company and a Japanese company in the telecom sector, mobile phones, 2007. And he said, and he was not the only one, a number of them said that, you know what, China is already kind of saturated. The wages are no longer as low as they used to be. So many of our advantages, our competitive advantages, is dwindling away. And we are always on the lookout for where else can we invest? And so we interviewed scores of such people, of lots of mostly Western, but also large companies from other parts of the world which had set up in China, including Chinese companies. And all of them said, we're looking for alternatives. And in their list of alternatives were 3 countries: Vietnam, Bangladesh, and India. Now you might ask why. See, for manufacturing, location matters. The distance matters. For services sector, the fact that we have all this offshoring all the way from the US and India, distance really doesn't matter. It's all done, you know, by the internet. In manufacturing, distance matters. You're actually transporting tangible stuff. So it's when you're moving from one place to another, it's you know, the nearest kind of in concentric circles, the nearest one. So Vietnam was close. Then by ship, well, you know, many of the other Southeast Asian countries had already been tapped for much of this investment. So the obvious thing is India. we have huge potential. There's a sizable labor force. We are on the shipping routes. And of course, there was already in existence at that time an avowed policy of promoting manufacturing, which still exists under the present government as well. Unfortunately, neither the previous regime nor the present one have done enough. I think we are all focused on this, and that's good. We definitely need manufacturing and we need services. But see, services is structurally very easy to kind of set up, right? You don't really need a whole, there are no supply chain issues, there are no logistics issues, there's no hard infrastructure issue, just a little bit in terms of energy and internet and all. But for manufacturing, you need all of this, plus you need a skilled blue-collar labor force. You need large numbers of engineers who are actually going to dirty their hands in the manufacturing sector. You need a significant amount of coordinating help from both the central government as well as the state governments. You need large amounts of hard infrastructure on the ground, and I don't just mean roads and electricity and all. The ports are very important. There was a time when the biggest ports in the world were Singapore and Rotterdam and all. Now all the big ports have shifted to the Far East. I think India can, if we do things properly, even geographically, and in many other ways. It's a long story for some other time. We have some significant advantages in boosting manufacturing. It's true, we do have some issues that can be, there are some obstacles, apart from coal and iron ore and things like that. We don't have a whole range of other natural resources, but that has not stopped other countries, has it, in developing significant manufacturing. I think a coordinated industrial policy set up by the central government in coordination with various state governments, which can focus on everything from skill creation to the hard infrastructure on the ground, to the, to ports, to support for marketing, to, helping with the entire supply chain in manufacturing. Will go a long way. It's a tragedy that we export to China all kinds of raw materials, which then come back to us, hugely value added. It's absurd.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
So, to answer your question,
Yeah,
I'm happy that the government is focusing on its two legs of the same stool, so to speak. This whole self-reliance campaign and to kind of manufacturing focus, but a lot needs to be done.
great. Professor Ashok, I will bring your attention now to different sector of the economy, which we say that can make India as knowledge-based economy. Now, as opposed to, sir, the infrastructure requirement of manufacturing sector, there are other domains also, like consultancy, analysis, simulation, design, drawing jobs. So there is opportunity in that area also. And India has a very good pool of talented technocrats, scientists, engineers, now, as we know, data scientists, etc., who are looking for such employments and are also willing to work on the wages which are far more competitive than rest of the places in the world. Now, looking at this reality, what keeps India, what stops India from becoming the knowledge-based economy? We always hear this buzzword that India can become knowledge-based economy because all ingredients are there. Why do we not see the actual result on the ground? How our economy can become a knowledge-based economy?
See, as I mentioned earlier, I think we have a, a large number of the fundamentals for being a service-oriented, software and data analytic and related fields oriented significant power in the world. That's a less of a problem for us than the manufacturing side. Because as I said, structurally it's simpler. Our entire kind of educational and even in some ways our socio-cultural ethos is targeted in that direction. So, and we have already made significant progress there. So I'm less worried about that. Here's the underlying problem. Given the fact that we have more than 1 million young people joining the working age population every month, we need job creation of that magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
The day we do that, we will be by far the fastest growing economy in the world, no question about that. 1 million, okay, per month. Now, how are we going to create that? Can everybody become a data scientist? Of course not. In every country of the, and by the way, so this 1 million also includes a large number of people who are going to migrate from the countryside to the cities.
Yeah.
In every country in the world, a large part of the initial economic push of growth has been people who moved from the countryside to urban areas to join the manufacturing sector, practically everywhere. Today we have about what, a 35%, I think, urbanization rate, maybe higher slightly. The many of the countries that we call developed had about that urbanization rate over 100 years ago. We are, over the next few decades, a huge influx is going to take place, but we need to create jobs for these people. All these jobs cannot be in the services sector. So manufacturing has to play its role. Okay, whether the manufacturing is, and of course now there is the whole environmental issue also to take into account. So whether they're going to be part of the, already existing mega urban centers, or should the focus be on second, third, fourth tier cities, or should they be kind of what they call in situ urbanization, where we create alternative urban centers elsewhere? That remains to be seen. One small digression here. Probably a lot of your viewers may already know this, and you may know this. So there are 50 states in the United States, right? But in these 50 states, only 17 states have as their capital the largest city of that state. Mm-hmm. 1/3. 2/3 of the states have a much smaller, sometimes, city which serves as the capital. Now, there are various reasons why this happened, but the consequence of this has been that it also kind of created another urban center that could, uh, kind of exploit some of the economies of scale of a growing urban center elsewhere, and minimize the congestion and some of the diseconomies of governance that a very large city can have, which we already see in India. Many of our larger, urban metropolitan areas are, have a problematic issue with governance, and of course we have a whole, that's a different topic altogether, the whole issue of urban financing at the level of cities and all that. But what am I trying to say? That urbanization is coming, whether there are any kind of romantic, village idealists out there or not. A large number of people are going to be needing jobs. And really the only way to focus on creating good jobs is, one, you have to have some significant amount of manufacturing. There's a possibility now of taking away a lot of manufacturing from China, partly also because they've become also kind of saturated. People may not know the number of folks employed in manufacturing in China plateaued a while ago and has even diminished in some areas. So there's a scope there. There's huge scope in services. There's huge scope in creating, light industries of various kinds out, food-based industries also. And there's an urgent need to improve the infrastructure across the board, which can, with a view to assisting in this whole renaissance, or rather the development of manufacturing, and how the education sector can help in all this.
Okay.
There is a role for planning. Everything is not determined by the market.
Yes.
I think this is an important thing to keep in mind.
It's true.
A lot of the Western countries will, talk about a market economy. Most people wouldn't know this, but do you know that in the US, the two big areas which had a huge multiplier effect on their growth trajectory in the 20th century, their education sector, and I'm not just talking about the higher education sector, but the school system was predominantly public. Secondly, the US Department of Agriculture, which played a huge role in making agriculture efficient through pricing support help, through information, through consulting with farmers, through coordinating, creating, markets, etc., over 100 years ago, which actually then created the impetus for folks coming into the manufacturing sector and creating that base. There's an old saying in economics that an industrially advanced country is above all else an agriculturally advanced country. So if I were to kind of coin a phrase, paraphrase that and take it further up, I would say a country with an advanced service sector is above all else a country with an advanced manufacturing sector as well. There are linkages across the board. It's difficult to have one without the other.
Great. Professor Ashok, when you say market in China, especially in manufacturing, is saturated, what do you mean by that, sir? And can India get advantage of that? And also, in addition to that, can cheap labor in India be one opportunity to harness this opportunity of manufacturing sector?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe saturated is the wrong word. What I'm saying is there is an opportunity, because most companies that are located in China, whether it's foreign companies or even Chinese companies, manufacturing I'm talking about, are looking for alternative places to invest. India is a very, very, very obvious place for a whole host of reasons that we spoke about. I don't want to stress too much this cheap labor thing. Why should we, stress the fact that we have cheap labor? Why this focus on this issue? It's known that it's cheaper than in most other countries. And that's probably attraction enough for a lot of these companies, but that's not why they're going to come. I can tell you that. They're going to come for other reasons. Ultimately, if they come for cheap labor and find that they cannot really, their costs pile up for other reasons, then even that equation doesn't work out.
Right.
So I think there is, as I repeat, there is an opportunity here. That opportunity actually has always been there. But it requires a coordinated role of both public and the private sectors.
In the beginning of our interaction, you mentioned about 3 countries. You mentioned about Taiwan, you mentioned about Bangladesh, and then India. So
I mentioned Vietnam, Bangladesh, and
Vietnam.
India, and you can see what is happening. One of the lesser known successes, economic successes of the past few decades has been Vietnam. It's been one of the fastest growing economies in the world.
Even Bangladesh is coming up.
And there you are. Exactly. And
so
we have, so in manufacturing, one key advantage, of course, that India has, like no other place, is, and in manufacturing it matters a lot, is the capacity for scale economies. We are a large country with a large labor force, the capacity to think in big terms, and the capacity to be able to kind of large enterprises. That's going to be key for a lot of manufacturing. Not in every sector, but in many of them.
Professor Ashok, whenever some multinational company is outsourcing to Indian companies, they have certain issues with us. Issues are related to the quality of the product, the quantities, and the timelines in which delivery is done. To what extent that is true, and what can be done to address these issues?
Well, we are not unique, in whatever problems we have with our timelines and etc. I'm sure they face these problems elsewhere also. Earlier, there used to be a concern, we don't know, maybe our data is not safe there and all that. And I remember having a conversation once with one of these US companies saying that, hold on, before you started offshoring to India, do you know that many of the 1-800 numbers even for credit cards, when you're calling the contact center, some of them were run out of prisons in the US. So are you telling me that you trusted those convicts in prisons, but you don't trust, people out in India? So of course that's all, it's water down the river and all that. I don't think there's any specific concern about that. The only concern is, especially in some areas of banking, finance, and healthcare, about the security of the data. And lots of Indian companies are extremely good with that.
Professor Ashok, you just now you mentioned that migration from rural area to urban, that is going to be the trend. Our big cities, you talk about Delhi, you talk about Bombay, they're already overburdened with such migration and such people coming from rural area. You already also worked in the housing sector. You've done a marvelous job in that domain also. So what do you suggest, sir, for the cities which are already overburdened? What can be the solution to this problem of housing for migrants?
Housing is I suppose, a affordable housing is the big problem, not housing per se. For a lot of people who are going to be migrating in from rural to urban areas, given the fact that our housing prices and generally our real estate prices are sky high to begin with, and partly it's because of the very kind of restricted nature of the land markets, together with transportation problems, together with the problem of creating alternative settlements, etc. Affordable housing becomes a big issue. There are a lot of potential solutions out there. As I mentioned, the expansion in peri-urban areas, which has already taken place, but then you need, efficient public transportation, efficient means of bringing people back and forth, creating jobs where the people are, or setting up new focusing on third, fourth tier cities, creating new urbanization centers in the countryside. Because what that will do is that it will relieve the pressure. It'll serve both purposes. It'll create new housing in those areas. It will also relieve pressure on prices in the extremely congested major cities of our country. Now, of course, there are huge lobbies that don't want that. There are in each and every economic transaction, there are two sides. And as somebody once said, when we are on the buying side, we become Karl Marx. When we are on the selling side, we are all Adam Smith.
That's true.
So the prices going down in urban areas, see what those who own houses there have to say about that. But the ultimate solution for any problem of this nature, which is, effectively due to the restriction on the supply side, is to boost supply.
Mm-hmm.
How I create new housing? How are you going to create new housing? Where's the land? So that then the next question has to be solved. Where exactly do you find a place where, but then you cannot do what one of the stories you must have heard that, in not just China, but in some other countries as well, they just built housing in the back of beyond. Point is that residential and commercial real estate have to go together, in the sense that people want to be where the jobs are. If you just create housing in the third and fourth tier cities, that's not going to kind of solve a problem unless the jobs are there as well, right? Which is why I initially started off by saying that you need to create jobs there and then, support housing development in these areas.
Yes.
For affordable housing related issues, of course, there's a whole lot of role for governments, for local bodies, in many ways. These are not easy problems, and they exist in more or less every country, unless, of course, you have something like public housing. Singapore has a predominantly public housing sector. And so the initial stage at which a person gets housing is they get this subsidized public housing, and then after a certain period you can sell that, you get some gain out of that, and you can use that as a down payment for a larger or better private housing. But then that requires such huge resources that I don't think we can do that. But in bits and pieces, is it possible? Of course.
Professor Ashok, now I take my interaction to little different direction of academic interest you have, and that is the data science. What I know, you have led the team of data scientists, engineers, and statisticians and solved many business problems. We want you to give some example of such particular case study.
Well, okay. I mean, I've worked on a wide range of use cases. I'm trying to think what would be some of them. So, okay, I can give you an example of a healthcare use case. So, you know that especially in the US, healthcare is very expensive. The US has approximately, if I'm not mistaken, about 20% of its GDP goes into healthcare. It's very expensive. Hospital bills are through the roof. Insurance premiums are high, etc., etc. So one thing that is of some concern to many healthcare providers as well as to the health insurance sector is, you know, often when a patient gets discharged, they get readmitted within 30 days sometimes. And that's a huge cost center for many hospitals. So they're trying to figure out how to reduce that number. So based on many a lot of data and modeling techniques, we came up with a way of figuring out who are the ones who are most likely to come back, get readmitted, and what can be done to prevent them from, you know, from their health slipping up, either through they're ignoring the medication regime or nutrition or exercise related stuff and coming back in again. So we created these kind of ranking matching algorithms which helped people figure out. So then the hospital could proactively focus on these people and see that they followed the regime properly. So this was one example. Then, yeah, a big one, of course, has always been, and I mentioned this before, I've also worked on this topic in my previous academic career, which is, you know, how responsive is the education sector to the needs of the economy? So a question is, let's say tomorrow there's a huge demand for data engineers in India. How is our education sector going to respond? Is it going to start taking in larger numbers of students who apply for data engineering? Now, if you actually go around and ask universities, they don't even know how to answer this question. What's the linkage between the education sector and the economy? They wouldn't even know what you're talking about. They'll say, oh, we take the same number that we did last year. Not that this is the standard answer in the US very often. So the way it's a long drawn out process that the signal from the economy, the market for various kinds of jobs, kind of filters through to the education sector through various channels of funding, donors, etc. And then they realize, okay, I think we need to, take in more students for biotech, let's say biostatistics or data engineering or whatever. Now, so this is a big problem, matching people with jobs. So one of the use cases I did for a large company was how to more efficiently match people, their skill sets, their interests, their degrees, their previous experience with the most appropriate job out there. This was a large use case, and because you have to realize there are some markets where there are huge frictions. It takes a long time. Housing market is one. If you want to buy or sell a house, it takes months and months.
Yeah.
Jobs, it could be much more efficient matching. So these are places where data science and data engineering and machine learning and all can help a lot.
Great, great. Professor Ashok, I want you to tell us something about the patent filing now. When we compare the situation in India with countries like US and China, situation is grim. We don't file much patents, and that too commercially not viable. So what is your advice on that?
Well, patent comes at the end of the line. I mean, we first need to create large number. So a good thing you brought up. Okay. I don't have the figures at my fingertips, but if I'm not mistaken, I heard that all of India, including all the IITs, engineering colleges, etc., produce as many PhDs in, say, computer science as maybe 2 universities in the US.
That's true.
By the way, the one behind me being probably the largest producer of PhDs.
Yeah.
Now, how are you going to, now I'm not saying that you need a PhD for innovation. I'm not saying that you need, in fact, we know, after all, lots of innovation that has been generated by college and high school dropouts. But as a systematic issue, you really need to create a whole lot of people who can potentially be researchers. It's only when you have large numbers of people who are not just researching, and I don't mean just in the fundamental sciences or anything. Companies produce a lot of patents after all. But in order to have that whole ethos of innovation and research and, a search for a new product, search for new discoveries, etc., you have to have a large number of people equipped with the appropriate skills for that, which means that we do need to have large numbers of not just people who are just going to go and be, workhorses in the IT sector or in other sectors, but those who will also look at, the innovation part. Partly it's also the culture that has developed, with many of these companies. They're more focused on they've had a good deal going so far, all these companies abroad who are coming to them for various offshoring products and services and various other activities, and they've been making enough money. And many of the R&D centers that I spoke to you about are actually intra-firm offshore units of US companies. So that innovation belongs to them, not to India. So the question is not of patents. Patents will come if we take care of the earlier part of the pipeline.
Yeah, that's true. So, Professor Ashok, my next question is even more relevant, and that is industry-academia interaction. We have seen that a university, UC Berkeley University, that has seamless connectivity with industrial houses, and that interaction is very good. So, what is the secret of that, and how we can emulate the same thing in India and Indian institutes of higher education?
Well, the way most of the universities here do is part of it is formalized, part of it is informal. The informal is of course, a lot of the graduates go into industry. So there is a lot of connection with, professors are consulting for industry. There are lots of, the industry is close by, at least in the case of the IT sector, we are not very far. And so both Berkeley and Stanford have linkages of many informal kinds with industry. But there are some formal structures also. So there are incubators that have been set up by universities. Excuse me, just one second. There are incubators that have been set up by many universities. There are on campuses. So actually, many startups can access resources of campus. There are funds that have been set up by many universities to fund various kinds of startups. There are lots of different kinds of platforms that have been created. There are constantly all kinds of conferences, webinars. There are industry, university kind of, what do you call them? Forums of various kinds that operate. And, ultimately a lot of knowledge diffusion is intangible. But if you create these opportunities, you'll find that many of the spillover benefits are tremendous. I don't know if the IITs do any of this. Partly it's okay. Partly it's also a location-based thingy. I think, let's say if we are talking of IITs, those in Chennai, Bombay, and Delhi probably are in a better position, to have this kind of a relationship with industry than the others. But many of the other regional colleges of engineering, Indian regional colleges of engineering, which are now the NIITs, I think, right? The NITs.
Yes, yes.
Are extremely good, by the way. All our engineering faculty say they are as good as anywhere in the world. There's sizable scope there. There's scope with the management institutes as well. In fact, the Business School of Berkeley has a number of funds and what they call accelerators and many other such institutions which regularly bring together people from academia for the research side and from industry for the applicational side to kind of come exchange ideas, come up with products, etc.
Yeah. So, Professor Ashok, I have already taken a lot of your time, sir. Last two questions for me now. So,
Okay.
I will ask you last two questions. And this is related to the authenticity or validity of data analytics. So, statistics may we know, sir, there can be some kind of, misinterpretation of the results. So, what is the validity of interpretation of the results which you get through artificial intelligence, machine learning, or data analytics?
A good question, Vijender. I'm going to talk only about that aspect of data analytics that deals with the business use cases, because there's a lot of data science and AI stuff that deals with, let's say, computer vision or speech recognition or something like that. So I'm not going to talk about that. But when it comes to use cases that have an economic angle to them, whether in healthcare, banking, finance, insurance, retail, e-commerce, job search, wherever there's a human behavioral angle, what I said before actually holds true. You had asked me, what's the meeting point of economics and data science? It's precisely this. The thing is, a lot of machine learning in Silicon Valley even today takes place in a very kind of black box kind of way. there's very little explainability involved. Why are we getting the result that we do? You know, what's the what are the causal driving factors?
Mm-hmm.
Is the result that we are getting spurious? You know, just some artifact of the data that we have. So I'll give you an example. Some years ago, a friend of mine had set up a company to figure out who are going to be buying before this whole electric car revolution came into being. Who are most likely to buy electric cars? And some of the results that he came up with were utterly absurd. They're something like, you know, those who belong to a particular religious denomination are going to come up buying electric cars. I said, why? What is the underlying driving structural reason for any of this? So the difference is, what does economic and an economic insight, or even those who are from the statistics field, what insights do they bring to this whole phenomenon that makes it better? We ask structural reasons. We ask, what is the underlying model? What is, or as a statistician would say, what is the underlying data generating process? What causes what? Causal inference, which is now another buzzword in the whole, data field. So we have to be careful. There are lots of models out there which people, unfortunately, the flip side of this whole combined machine learning and software revolution has been that everybody has at the tip of their, with a few clicks, they can access all kinds of algorithms, run some models, and come up with some results. We have to be very careful to validate and vet those results, not just by, I don't just mean the usual A/B test and this and that. I mean, what are the underlying drivers that have caused this result? What is the underlying relationship? Do we get this relationship out of some fundamental demand and supply side, to going back to the very basics of economics, that makes this result pass the smell test? Does it make any sense? So this is one very important consideration. Yes.
Great. So, Professor Ashok, I started my interaction with your introduction, and I'm going to end also my interaction at you. So, my last question to you is related to your academic background. So, you are an economist and at the same time data scientist. How natural is this combination, or do we find it rarely? Because with engineering, all these things go, but for economists, what were the advantages, sir, for you being data scientist? And is this a natural combination?
So, in fact, my answer to the previous question was exactly this. What are the advantages of coming with an insights from economics to this? That we ask some very basic causal questions. We develop models that are the result of underlying economic behavioral relationships. Now, of course, this won't work in, facial recognition and voice recognition and all that, but it works for a very, 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 practically across the board, it works in most economic and business related use cases. The other question that you asked, can you remind me? There was the second part of the question.
I simply asked, sir, how natural is this combination? Economist and data scientist.
Okay. Yeah. So increasingly so. My former professor who taught economics and microeconomics became the chief economist of Google.
Okay.
He's the one who helped develop, I think, a lot of their pricing algorithms for the ads that you see on Google.
Okay.
Many other companies have, economists working for them. If I'm not mistaken, Amazon recently hired literally some 200-300 of them, because I think it's being driven home. There's an increasing recognition that economists with their techniques and their kind of data science the kind of data techniques that they use
Mhm.
are a very big kind of value added, feature for a lot of the machine learning based data science that goes on.
Professor Ashok, I'm a little tempted to ask you one more question, though it was the last question. So when we see Indian universities, I find that there is some kind of rigidities. Only students from particular field of knowledge, like computer science, are permitted to pursue higher education in certain specialized courses like artificial intelligence or machine learning. So what is that situation in US, and what is your take on this?
I'm not sure I understood. You're saying you cannot do a PhD in artificial intelligence unless you have a degree in computer science.
Yes, specifically I'm saying that if you have graduation in computer science, you can pursue your master's in artificial intelligence and machine learning. But suppose you are from other branch of engineering or maybe like economics. So can you pursue your master's in these kind of specialized courses?
So I'm not a computer scientist, so I don't know the precise answer to this question, but I have a feeling that here also it's the same. They might take, but hold on. It's possible that they take people with a mathematics background.
Okay.
So that's possible. And it's possible that they take people from some other engineering backgrounds as well. But
yeah, that's true.
To be honest, I'm not sure I know the exact answer.
Great. So, Professor Ashok, I have come to an end of this marathon session, I'll say, but very interesting session, sir, with you, and lot of informative session. And let me thank you from my side and on behalf of all my subscribers, Indian students, technocrats, for this very informative session, sir. Really, thanks a lot.
You're welcome, and you're welcome. Thank you very much.